Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and I've got our resident expert here with me to really get into the weeds today.
Hey everyone, yeah, I'm thrilled to be here for this one. It's it's a topic that I think totally changes how you experience something you probably already enjoy.
Exactly. And, to kick things off, I want you to just imagine trying to ship this massive wooden barrel of beer all the way from London to India, but like in the late 1700s.
Oh man, just a logistical nightmare.
Right. You're on a rocking ship. It's a grueling 6-month voyage. You have zero refrigeration whatsoever.
And you're crossing the equator twice.
Twice. So under normal circumstances, that beer is just going to turn into this unpalatable sour vinegar long before it ever reaches port.
Yeah, the heat and emotion would just destroy it.
Exactly. So the solution at the time wasn't, some elegant feat of modern engineering. It was basically just brute force. Brewers simply stuffed the barrels with this overwhelming amount of bitter preservative hop flowers.
Just packed them in there.
Yeah. They essentially created this 18th century botanical bubble wrap to protect the liquid from the heat and the constant agitation of the ocean.
And in doing so, they totally accidentally invented a style that would come to dominate the modern craft landscape, right? The India Pale Ale.
Yep, the iconic IPA.
Because those early brewers, they weren't trying to create a tropical citrusy flavor profile for your summer afternoon. They were literally engaged in a biological war against spoilage.
Just trying to keep the product sellable.
Exactly. The intense bitterness was just a byproduct of survival. It's a perfect example of how the beverages we consider completely standard today were born out of intense environmental stress and necessary biochemical manipulation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that intersection of biology, chemistry, and historical necessity is exactly what we are focusing on today.
It's the core of the whole craft.
Right. We're looking at how brewers manipulate these microscopic variables, like stressing ingredients, altering temperatures, hijacking chemical reactions, just to force yeast into creating entirely new flavor profiles.
Which is incredibly hard to do consistently.
It really is. And for our sources today, we're working with the foundational knowledge and the highly curated catalog of whiskey.dk.
A fantastic source to draw from.
Yeah, and they actually recently secured the Dansk Elmarkt 2026 award, which is this major industry accolade that specifically recognizes an outstanding, high-quality beer selection.
Right, and that's a really significant industry benchmark. It highlights a deep mechanical understanding of the craftsmanship behind the bottles they choose.
So it's not just a popularity contest.
No, it's a critical distinction. When you're looking at a selection of that caliber, you aren't just looking at clever marketing. You are looking at a masterclass in controlled chemistry.
Which brings us to the actual ingredients. I mean, the modern beer enthusiast already knows the basic four, right? Water, malt, hops, and yeast.
Yeah, we definitely don't need to rehash the dictionary definitions of those for you.
Right. But what's fascinating is how manipulating them changes everything. Let me frame it using a musical analogy for you, just to take it down to the mechanics.
Oh, I love a good analogy. Let's hear it.
So think of those four ingredients as a rock band. Water is your stage, the acoustics, the mineral foundation the band plays on.
Okay, saving the scene.
Yep. Malt is your baseline, providing the structural body and the fermentable sugars. Hops act as your lead guitar, cutting through with those sharp, volatile, aromatic riffs.
Nice. And the yeast.
Yeast is your highly temperamental lead singer.
That is extremely accurate.
Right. You can have the exact same stage, the exact same bass line, the exact same guitar riffs. But if you change the environmental conditions, say you just drop the temperature in the room by 10 degrees, that lead singer completely changes their genre.
They just flip a switch.
Exactly. They stop singing jazz and just start screaming punk rock.
What's fascinating here is how incredibly sensitive that process is.
Yeah.
And that environmental manipulation is most apparent when we look at the role of water, which honestly is often the most overlooked component.
Oh, totally. People just think, well, it's wet.
Right. But water isn't just a neutral liquid. It is a highly active chemical solvent. If you look at the whiskey.dk selection, the distinct regional styles they feature are heavily reliant on historical water profiles.
Because you couldn't just order custom water chemistry back in the day.
Exactly. For instance, adjusting the ratio of sulfate to chloride in the brewing water completely changes how the hops express themselves.
Oh, really? Just the minerals change the hop flavor?
Oh, absolutely. Higher sulfates will actively accentuate the sharp, crisp bitterness of the hops, while higher chlorides will actually round out the malt, making the beer feel much softer and, like, fuller on the palate.
Wow. Which perfectly brings us to the first major divergence in our timeline. Like, what happens when brewers actively suppress the biological expression of the yeast?
The punk rocker gets told to sing a lullaby.
Exactly. We see this in the cold fermented world of pilsners and lagers. If you lower the temperature, you fundamentally slow down the metabolism of the yeast.
Precisely. We are talking about bottom fermenting yeast strains here, specifically Saccharomyces pastorianus.
A bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, but crucial. Because they operate at cold temperatures, the metabolism is incredibly sluggish and clean. They don't produce those complex, fruity flavor compounds called esters.
Or those spicy phenols that you find in warmer fermentations.
Exactly. They basically just quietly process the sugars and then drop to the bottom of the tank, out of sight, out of mind.
You know, I've always thought of a high-quality lager like a brilliantly executed consommé or just a really clear broth.
That's a great way to put it.
Because you're actively suppressing those expressive yeast characteristics, you strip away any complex, heavy flavors that a brewer might normally use to, like, hide their mistakes.
Oh, there is nowhere to hide in a lager.
Right. If you overshoot your hop additions or if there's this harshness in your malt extraction, there are no fruity esters to cover it up. The flaw is just going to sit right in the middle of your palate.
It is the ultimate tightrope walk for a brewer. The clean, balanced nature of a cold fermented lager leaves absolutely zero room for error.
So it's actually incredibly hard to make.
Highly difficult. Historically, this wasn't even possible until the exact right variables aligned. I mean, the Pilsner, as a specific style, didn't even exist until 1842 in the city of Pilsen.
That feels surprisingly recent.
It is. It required the intersection of extremely soft local water, newly invented pale malts that weren't darkened by harsh roasting fires, and a smuggled bottom fermenting yeast strain.
Smuggled? That's amazing.
Yeah, that specific combination created a beer so brilliantly clear and crisp that it essentially conquered the globe.
It's just so fascinating to me because today people often view light lagers and pilsners as the simple or basic choice. But mechanically, achieving that flawless, thirst-quenching crispness requires a level of technical precision that is incredibly unforgiving.
Exactly. And that technical precision is why they remain the ultimate versatile choice for you. The lack of heavy esters means they don't fatigue your palate at all.
Making them the perfect structural counterpoint to almost any rich or savory food, pizza, burgers, salads. It just works.
Totally. It just resets your palate.
So if cold fermentation is all about suppression and clarity, let's look at what happens when brewers go in the exact opposite direction, when they turn up the heat.
This is where things get a bit chaotic.
Right. They use top fermenting Saccharomyces cerevisiae and intentionally encourage the yeast to become highly expressive. We are entering the massive, highly resilient world of ales.
Yeah, warmer fermentation temperatures put the yeast into a highly active, almost frantic state. As they rapidly consume those sugars, they off-gas a massive amount of secondary compounds.
Those are the esters and phenols we mentioned earlier.
Exactly. And this is where you get the warm, fruity, and highly complex flavor profiles that characterize everything from a light pale ale all the way to a dark brown ale.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this warm environment is the perfect playground for that 18th century survival mechanism we talked about, the IPA, to really evolve.
The botanical bubble wrap.
Yes, the history is great, but the modern application of hops in ales is where the chemistry just gets wild. We've moved so far beyond just using hops as a bittering agent for preservation.
Oh, miles beyond it. Modern brewers are manipulating hop chemistry to paint entirely new sensory landscapes for you.
If we look at the evolution from the classic West Coast IPA to the modern New England IPA, or NIAPA, it's basically a masterclass in shift and chemical extraction.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really shows how a style adapts. A traditional West Coast IPA relies on boiling the hops for a fairly long time.
Right, which creates that classic bite.
Exactly. The heat causes a chemical reaction called isomerization, which converts the alpha acids in the raw hops into iso-alpha acids. That is precisely what gives you that sharp, clear, resinous bitterness that coats your tongue.
But, and this is the crucial part, boiling also volatilizes the delicate essential oils in the hops, the myrcene, the linalool,
which carry all the bright citrus and pine aromas.
Yeah, they literally just evaporate into the air above the kettle. You lose them.
Right.
So to get the NIPA, that hazy, soft, heavily tropical beer that basically looks like a glass of orange juice, brewers completely changed the extraction timeline.
Right. Instead of boiling the hops early on, they had massive just massive quantities of hops, much later in the process, often during active fermentation itself.
Which triggers biotransformation, right?
You got it. It triggers this biological process called biotransformation. The active yeast cells interact directly with the hop oils, structurally altering the chemical compounds and unlocking entirely new, intensely juicy tropical flavors.
Flavors that didn't even exist in the raw hop cone.
Exactly. It's chemical alchemy.
And because they aren't boiling those hops for very long, they drastically reduce the isomerization of those alpha acids. So you end up with a beer that has a massive hop aroma and flavor, but a surprisingly low perceived bitterness.
Plus, the interaction between the hop polyphenols and the proteins from the malt creates that permanent cloudy haze.
It completely subverts your expectation of what a heavily hopped beer should be.
It's a brilliant manipulation of the brewing timeline. You get the sessionability and the aromatic punch without the palate-wrecking bitterness.
It really shows how a single style can fracture into entirely different sensory experiences just by changing exactly when you introduce the ingredient.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's pivot from the hop oils over to the malt backbone, because the manipulation of malt creates an entirely different set of extremes. We are moving into the dark, heavy world of porters and stouts.
The heavy hitters.
Yeah, and I really want to push back on a common misconception here. A lot of people, they assume a stout is just a porter that spent a few extra months in the barrel, or maybe just a porter with a higher alcohol by volume, like a porter that went to the gym.
I've heard that gym analogy so many times.
Right. But the distinction is actually much more mechanical than that, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's a heated debate even among traditional brewers. But the mechanical distinction really lies in the Maillard reaction and the specific type of grain used.
The Maillard reaction, that's the browning process, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's the chemical process of browning. It's what happens when you sear a steak or toast a piece of bread. In a porter, the malt is generally roasted to a point where it imparts gentle, complex notes of caramel, toffee, and a light nuttiness.
So it has a softer, kind of rounder profile.
Yes. But with a stout, the brewers push that roasting process to the absolute extreme.
They just torch it.
Practically. Stouts historically utilize unmalted roasted barley. They take raw barley and roast it at super high temperatures until it's essentially charred.
Wow.
That intense thermal degradation creates sharp, acrid, highly roasted flavor compounds. That is what gives a classic stout its deep, almost slightly burnt, heavy, dark chocolate or espresso profile.
Okay, so it's the difference between the smooth caramelization of a medium roast coffee and the intense, sharp bite of a dark espresso pull.
That is the perfect way to look at it.
That makes a lot of sense. The heat literally carbonizes the grain, changing the solubility and the flavor profile entirely. And the modern craft scene has taken that highly roasted base and expanded it exponentially.
Oh, without a doubt.
You look at the whiskey.dk selection and you see these massive barrel-aged imperial stouts. Brewers are taking these heavily roasted, high-alcohol beers and letting them sit in bourbon or rum barrels for months.
Which allows the alcohol to slowly extract the vanillins and tannins from the oak. It literally turns the beverage into a dense, viscous dessert.
It's a perfect utilization of the beer's structure, though. I mean, a delicate pilsner would be entirely overwhelmed by oak and bourbon.
It would taste like alcoholic plywood.
Yeah, exactly. But the intense, charred malt backbone of an imperial stout is robust enough to integrate those barrel compounds beautifully.
It stands up to the barrel.
Okay, so we've covered the suppression of yeast in lagers, the manipulation of hops in IPAs, and the thermal destruction of malt in stouts. Now we need to look at the real edge cases, the styles where brewers intentionally invite absolute chaos into the vat.
The rebels.
Yes. Let's talk about wheat beers and sours, because the sheer weirdness of these processes is amazing to me.
Wheat beers, like your traditional German Weiss beer or Belgian wit beer, are a prime example of leveraging yeast for highly specific chemical outputs.
Right. When we talk about a Weiss beer having distinct notes of banana and clove, it's vital for you to understand that no fruit or spices are anywhere near the brewing equipment.
Not at all.
This is where it really blurs the line between chemistry and cooking. We associate bananas with a physical fruit, but biologically, the flavor we perceive is just a chemical compound called isoamyl acetate.
Exactly. And specific strains of wheat beer yeast naturally synthesize that exact same compound during fermentation.
Which is just wild.
It is. The yeast produces isoamyl acetate, so your olfactory receptors signal banana to your brain.
Yeah.
At the same exact time, the yeast produces a phenol called 4-vinyl guaiacol, which is chemically identical to the primary flavor compound in cloves.
So, by carefully controlling the fermentation temperature and the specific yeast pitch rate, a brewer can dictate exactly how much banana versus how much clove ends up in your glass.
It is pure biochemical engineering.
But even that level of engineering feels incredibly controlled compared to the world of sours.
Oh yeah, sours are a whole different beast.
Because when we look at traditional brewing, the entire facility is sterilized. Any bacteria entering a batch of lager or stout is considered a catastrophic infection that will just ruin thousands of gallons of beer.
It's a brewer's worst nightmare.
Right. Yet with sours, brewers are intentionally inoculating their worts with bacteria.
It sounds totally counterintuitive to every food safety protocol we have, but it is a highly calculated risk. The primary agent here is lactobacillus.
Which is a heterofermentative or homofermentative bacteria, depending on the strain.
Exactly. It's the exact same family of bacteria responsible for the tang in yogurt or the bite in sauerkraut.
So instead of just converting sugars into alcohol like standard yeast, the lactobacillus is consuming the sugars and converting them into lactic acid.
Yep. The lactic acid drops the pH of the beer significantly. This gives the liquid an incredibly bright, tart, and refreshing acidity. It fundamentally changes the structure of the beverage.
Because it no longer relies on hop bitterness to balance the malt sweetness, it relies on sharp acidity.
Exactly.
I think the challenge for a lot of people is overcoming the psychological barrier. Like, if you take a sip expecting the roasted warmth of a stout or the resinous pine of an IPA, and you get hit with the sharp, puckering acidity of a sour, your brain initially registers it as spoiled.
Because you aren't expecting it.
Right. But if you reframe the context, if you approach a sour the way you approach a dry, acidic white wine, a tangy kombucha, or a sharp blue cheese, it becomes a phenomenal culinary experience.
Reframing the context is crucial. I always tell people, view it as a culinary adventure. The acidity in a well-crafted sour cuts through rich, fatty foods with incredible precision. It is an entirely different vector of flavor.
So, what does this all mean? We've mapped out the extremes, from the cold fermented clarity of lagers to the biotransformation of hazy IPAs, the charred malts of stouts, and the lactic acid of sours.
We've covered the whole map.
Yeah. The question is, how do you actually utilize this map? When you are faced with a massive, curated selection like the one Whiskey.DK offers, how do you translate your own palate into the correct chemical profile without just getting totally overwhelmed?
This raises an important question about how often we actually get stuck in our beverage comfort zones. The most effective strategy is to map your existing everyday flavor preferences directly to the primary brewing mechanisms we've discussed.
That makes sense.
You already possess a highly developed palate based on what you consume daily. You just need to identify the dominant chemical traits you prefer.
Okay, let's run a practical diagnostic for the listener then. An actionable cheat sheet. If your morning routine heavily features dark, French press coffee, or if you naturally gravitate toward high percentage, bitter dark chocolate.
Then your palate actively seeks out the complex, acrid compounds created by the Maillard reaction and intense roasting.
So in that case, you just bypass the hop-heavy beers entirely and go straight to the stouts and porters.
Exactly. The unmalted roasted barley will deliver the exact thermal degradation profile your palate is already comfortable with.
Okay, conversely, what if you prefer vibrant, highly acidic flavors? Maybe you start your day with fresh grapefruit juice, or you love heavily citrus-stressed salads and tart lemonades.
That means your palate favors sharp, volatile aromatics and bright acidity. That points you in two potential directions.
IPAs or sours?
Right. You can seek out the heavy hop oils and biotransformation of a New England IPA for that massive, juicy tropical hit. Or if you want pure structural acidity, you lean into the lactobacillus and explore the sours.
And if you just want sheer thirst-quenching efficiency, like a glass of ice water with a lemon wedge or a crisp, sparkling mineral water, you want the biological suppression we talked about earlier.
You want a beautifully executed cold-fermented pilsner or lager, where the yeast gets out of the way and leaves a flawless, clean finish.
The key to this diagnostic approach is really removing the variables that confuse the palate, which is why the Whiskey.DK strategy heavily emphasizes the use of curated tasting boxes.
Yes. When you buy a diverse tasting box, you are setting up a controlled laboratory in your own home. It's the perfect, low-risk way to explore.
It really is the scientific method applied to your Friday night. If you commit to a six-pack of a style you aren't sure about, You might force yourself to drink it just to not waste it, which ruins the experience.
And you'll probably never try that style again.
Exactly. But a tasting box allows you to isolate the variables. You can pour a West Coast IPA next to a New England IPA and immediately register the difference between boiled alpha acid isomerization and active fermentation biotransformation without needing a chemistry degree to understand it.
You just taste the resin versus the juice.
Yeah. By isolating those variables, you frequently discover that you don't actually dislike a certain style. You just disliked a specific brewer's execution of it, or you tasted it out of sequence.
A tasting box totally mitigates that risk and encourages genuine palate exploration. You might discover a beer you didn't even know you'd love.
So we have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with the harsh realities of an 18th century sea voyage that forced the creation of the IPA.
We broke down how cold temperatures create the unforgiving, clear broth of a pilsner.
We explored the molecular manipulation of hops, the carbonization of malt, and the intentional deployment of bacteria to create lactic acid.
There's a lot of chemistry.
It is. And all of these distinct, highly technical styles are beautifully represented in that Whisky.dk Dansk Elmerk 2026 award-winning selection, which really proves just how vast and scientifically complex this field has become.
It is a phenomenal testament to human ingenuity. Brewers have taken 4 basic ingredients and, through centuries of trial, error, and intense biological manipulation, built an incredibly diverse sensory landscape.
And we are going to keep building on this foundation. In our next deep dive, we are taking these distinct chemical profiles, the hop oils, the roasted malts, the lactic acid, and applying them directly to the culinary world.
Oh, that's going to be a good one.
We'll explore the specific molecular reasons why certain beer styles elevate certain dishes to entirely new heights, and why some pairings just completely crash your palate.
But before we wrap up, there's one final, lingering thought I want you to ponder regarding the evolution of these styles.
Wait on us.
We've established that the most iconic beers in history were not born out of a desire to be trendy. They were born out of strict environmental constraints.
Right, biological necessity. Yeah.
Exactly. The IPA was a brute force preservation method for ocean transit. The lager evolved because brewers had to rely on cold European caves for stabilization. So when you look at the unique, unprecedented challenges of our modern era, drastic climate shifts altering hop and barley yields, global supply chain disruptions, and entirely new technologies in water chemistry, it forces you to wonder.
What's next?
Exactly. What completely radical, biochemically necessary new beer style is currently being forced into existence right now that we'll be drinking as an absolute standard classic in 50 years?
Wow. It's incredible to think that the next great leap in brewing isn't going to come from a marketing boardroom. It's going to come from a brewer just trying to solve a biological problem.
That's the beauty of the craft.
The next time you look at that massive selection of options, remember that you aren't just looking at random flavors. You are looking at centuries of forced adaptation, chemical manipulation, and survival, neatly packaged in aluminum and glass. Keep exploring those variables, map your palate, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.